Welcome back, my friends, to the sweet spot where IT leaders share the insight with other leaders and others that want to lead. My name is Carlos Vargas, and as in every week, I have my two co-hosts, Howard Holton and Paul Lewis.
Hello, hello. See, this is my wrong hand. Carlos made me change the mirroring. I'm used to waving with my left, but this is just weird. I can't even turn now. I have no idea to do that.
Well, I think you have to wave with the other hand because you're Canadian. We need to make it a.
That's right. But I'm used to mirroring, so now I can't center myself. I have no ability to think in reverse.
Right.
So
but wait, sir,
probably-
you're an executive. You don't center yourself. You wait for the Earth to move into the proper position.
Right. Just wait a bit. It'll be fine. Every 24 hours, I'm in the perfect position.
So where are we today? Home? No, you're not home.
Yeah.
No, I think you're the only one that's home. I'm
Yeah.
in Chicago.
I'm
getting
in
some
Ottawa,
dogs?
Ontario, Canada.
Is it cold already?
It is not cold. Well, I don't know. Cold from your perspective, yes. Cold from Ottawa's perspective, no.
Yeah,
Right.
that's true. Miami cold is 76.
Right.
Oh no, it's hotter than that here. It's mid 80s, but also high humidity. It's not my favorite.
This is 27, which I'm sure converts to something like in the mid 50s. Maybe
No,
60.
27's got to be like high 80s, right?
High 80s. Seems
Really?
unlikely. Let's
Yeah, I mean, times 2 plus 30. This
see.
is
80.6. Look at you. Low 80s.
low 80s, but still.
Yeah, that's not bad.
There you go. It's 80s. It's.
Well,
I don't have a
actually-
coat.
Last week you guys were traveling on some kind of conference. This week you're somewhere else. You guys are always up. Everything is good for you all the time. Is there any time that there's anything that's a little iffy? Anything dark?
Do you define 250,000 miles a year and 180 nights in hotels good?
Yeah, man. I hit titanium elite status in March.
Right.
Right? And I'm unlikely to actually reach ambassador.
That's the worst part.
Right.
Is you travel so often and still can't make the $23,000 USD minimum.
Yeah, man.
It's killer.
Right. I was up at 4:00 in the morning to get to a 5:00 flight after being up till midnight or something because my dog got into chocolate. Right. To then get on a flight because I've got to speak on behalf of a customer, and I can't let my customer down, even though I'm terrified that my dog is not healthy. Right. My daughter could tell me, my wife could tell me, my dog can't tell me. My dog just kind of looks at me with that same doggish look on their face all the time, going, "Dad, why are you leaving? Where are you going?" Which they look at me every time.
Right.
Right. And I don't know how many miles away am I? 2,500 miles away from home right now. Right. So no, I mean, I think it's important to understand that, you know, not only heavy is the head that wears the crown, but it's not the crown. It's simply a crown, and it's a crown that tends to get a bit of crap flowing downhill. Right. And as a tech executive, that's oftentimes the face of your organization. It's not always rosy all the time.
In fact, like I have the IT team. You've got the IT team too, right? As
Most
big
of my
as it
life.
is, you have the IT team. Yeah,
I have the IT team. Yeah.
Giggle. In my 30 years, there has not been a point in time where IT has not had a negative opinion by the rest of the organization. It's always not good enough. It's always not fast enough. It's always not providing enough services, even though we're providing as much service as the budget would allow for.
Right.
It's still not good enough, right? There's this imaginary, you should have 3 times more money and provide me 3 times more value.
I mean, yes. I mean, I think that's inaccurate. I think historically I provide between 1.3 and 1.6 times the value of the money I'm providing.
Right.
Right. I have never.
It's not a 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, it's never been a 1-to-1. It's never been I'm batting at par. Otherwise, I'd be so frustrated with myself I couldn't sleep at night. But
now, is that your view or is that the view of the CFO? The CFO thinks it's
no,
more
the
like
CFO.
0.8.
I mean, it's 50-50, right? Like some organizations, the CFO is an ally and a partner, which I have now, and some organizations they're enemy number 1, 2, or 3,
Right.
right? Like they're either a big supporter of IT and technology as an enabler, and me as the leader of that, or they're not.
Right.
And it's very, very seldom that you get to choose.
So let's think about this. Almost everybody in IT know when we mention the dark side, have a reference to we know who. So,
Are we not allowed to say the name, or we get?
well, I don't know if we get thing or not, but we know Star Wars. But again,
No,
so
I think we can make references. We just can't use media from.
Right.
so
Right.
if we think,
Of course, you're speaking of Dark Helmet.
Dark Helmet.
so a lot of times they see IT as the dark side, and they see themselves as a rebellion. Like every other department are leading the company towards the future, and IT is the one that is always holding them down,
For
like
sure.
the dark side. Give us a little bit of a sense of, from an executive side, what it could be some of the dark side or the downfalls that you guys deal on a consistent basis to try to support all those other departments. You started giving a good idea. Like you get the budget cut and they ask you for 3 times the effort, but what does that translate when you are leading a team for a company like that?
I mean, it's unpleasant to say the least, right? Because like take a look at the suite that all have C at the front of their titles. The CEO is focused on revenue. The CEO is focused on market position. The CEO is focused on representing the board and the shareholder. Right? Chief Revenue Officer is directly attached to all of the revenue of the organization. COO is attached to everything the CRO sells. Right? As you go through that list of titles, there's only the technology titles that don't have a direct line to revenue in every company.
Mhm.
Right? And so the battle is often we're often fighting a battle on an uneven playground, especially when you recognize that not one transaction happens without us. Not one product is shipped. Not one customer gets any communication without the very, things that we provide. Right? I kind of feel talking about this like Jack Nicholson on the stand. Right? Like you want the very freedom that I provide, and then complain about the way in which I provide it, or some such monologue.
Right. And did you call it in? Damn right you called it in. Agreed. I find that
Wait. Paul just swore.
yeah, damn is as much as you're gonna get to that.
Swears, right? Damn right, I called it in. But still, I think it should be noted. I swear 3 times an episode, and so we should celebrate when Paul does one.
Celebrate.
We need to put an explicit.
Right.
Now look what's going to happen. We're going to get an NC-17 rating. We're going to get a T for teen rating.
Usually Carlos has the button to do the cheers. I have heard often the term tech-enabled insert department name. Tech-enabled sales, tech-enabled operations, tech-enabled finance. I don't know if they mean by that statement that IT supports them in their endeavors to deliver their function, or they mean they plan on buying some technology to support the endeavors that they're.
Sure. I mean, like all of this could have actually been resolved if we'd have just set up chargebacks with API style calls for every packet of network traffic that each department transmitted.
Right.
Right. Like we could have made our value apparent if we'd have been back billing all this stuff to begin with.
Right.
Right. Think of how much easier life would have been if every department had to pay for every kilobyte of YouTube, of every kilobyte of Netflix, of every kilobyte of whatever, insert wasteful thing here.
Right.
And they had to actually pay for that and justify it. Right. Much less the legitimate work that they did. I don't know of any company that actually instituted chargebacks for any lasting period of time to any level of accuracy.
Do you think direct costs, so direct chargebacks, are the problem child, or the shared costs? So the shared SAN, the shared network, the shared
Well,
people like security to support the environment. Isn't that always the point of contention?
well, yeah, but if you're going to do chargebacks, then you use a loaded rubric, right? Like if you're going to use chargebacks, there are no shared costs. All of the costs get traced back to something that gets charged back.
Right.
Right. You can't have, like, here's your chargeback, and by the way, here's your piece of the pie.
Right.
Right. Like,
but that in turn becomes the argument, right? Because the direct ones are easy, right? You have a team that does application work just for finance.
Sure.
But then you have, ongoing data center fees that is just out of the box, $2,000 for pipe and ping. And you're now going to divide that in some calculated way amongst the three line of businesses.
Sure, but you don't justify it; you just do it.
Right. But
Like,
isn't that where the argument?
Like, we're not going to have a conversation. What we decided is the number of you overall for that service is this. Your percentage of use of that service is this, and therefore your percentage of that cost is this. It's not, the fact that we allow the debate means people aren't coming to the table willing to even have the debate. They're just coming to the table trying to get the cost low so they can continue to abuse the IT department.
Right.
Like, no one takes the conversation seriously, including us.
They want their line of business net profit to be as high as physically possible by minimizing the IT expense.
Correct.
But somebody has to bear that expense.
Sure. The business bears that expense, and then the business complains about that expense on a minute by minute, day by day basis.
So if they're complaining for the expense, how do they then justify when, let's say, data center need to expand? What is the dark side of that conversation when new services need to be added? And like you said, they go to a meeting and they're constantly fighting. How does somebody actually justify the cost for the expansion?
It depends, would be what I would answer, right? It depends. A good IT department communicates that stuff plenty ahead of time. And you have a schedule for those activities, right? Like, ideally, you've OpExed as much as you possibly can, and you're using some sort of prediction to map out what the cost of that will be in the future.
Right.
I'm not a fan of capitalizing anything that has an expiry date. So I can capitalize a cabinet in a data center, doesn't reasonably have an expiration date, but I cannot capitalize a server. Because the second I say, cool, we agreed that this would be a 3-year refresh, they're going to go, yeah, no, we changed the cap table without telling you.
That's right.
We've capitalized it over 5 years or 7 years or 9 years or 10 or whatever they chose, right? And now you're having to stretch and strain a device long beyond its life cycle. It's one of the big advantages to cloud. It forces you into an operating expense. You don't want to increase the operating expense. Cool, tell me what services to turn off because I have no control over it.
Right.
I can't stretch it. I can't sweat it.
Right. You can slow it down, but you can't do any of
I can slow the expansion. I can reduce the services. So tell me what you'd like me to turn off.
Right.
So even though if you have it that way, the question then that I will have is if a department need to consume more, do they have to justify it right away, or just the business eat the expense and later on they figure that out? Because like you said, the downside is that the IT team gonna end up having the bill, and then you had to somehow pass it back to that department.
Sure, but now we go back to, were you actually did you actually have a cloud ready operating model before you went into cloud, or did you just move into cloud and expect everything to be magic and fairy dust?
Didn't we talk about that one time that we
1,100 times? I think we've talked about cloud operating model more than once, right? But the reality is that's part of your operating. Part of your operating model is, well, what we now call FinOps, but the financial side of how IT will operate. And long before you get into cloud, your operating model needs to have a level of maturity to be able to handle the financial aspect of cloud so that you can say, This department is using these resources, so this department needs to pay for these resources. The business as a whole is using these resources, and the business as a whole needs to, like, these are foundational. They don't go anywhere. They don't scale up or down too terribly much. They're relatively reasonably flat. And then, this is how we build these things out. And the good thing about cloud is it allows that to a level that we really didn't have in the past, because so many things are reduced down to a unit cost to make that somewhat easy. But you still have to have the accounting in place. You still have to have the FinOps in place to manage that. Thankfully, there are tools to help with that now.
The chaos of IT in cloud is the surprise, right? So I agree with you. It is relatively easy to price something when you know how much something's going to be, right? I know it's 5 vCPUs and X amount of storage. What is difficult to predict is how much of that you're going to use during the testing process of the first release of a project. It's not entirely obvious all the time that you're going to have 8 iterations of this testing, and therefore you're going to consume 10,000 a month when in production it's only going to be 1,000 a month, because you don't always know that fact. And those surprises is what creates the chaos and the spend of cloud, I find.
I think the unknowns create the chaos, but it is the job to reduce the unknowns, right? It is the job to at least get in front of them and go, okay, look, this is the first application this team is putting in the cloud. And while we're going to monitor it, we can't really control it. They've estimated it's $2,500 a month. So we're going to budget $10K a month. We're going to budget it for 3 months or 4 months or 5 months. And then we'll come back and we'll re-level and we'll rebudget.
Yeah. It's
right?
the COTS, you could figure that out. But if you're building your own app, sometimes you make a $180K mistake that month. Somebody's got to pay for that.
That's also why you put controls in place.
Right.
I can put spend limits in place to help compensate for that. Right. And if you're not using those, if you're just allowing a free-for-all, well, again, we go back to your operating model is fundamentally broken. Like you've effectively said, well, I mean, the cost of those controls is too high to the business. Money is less of a cost to the business.
Right.
Right. So I mean, we've talked about friction many times on this podcast, and that's effectively what we're talking about now, right? So what is the cost of friction to your business, and what is the cost of real dollars to your business? Because that's what you're going to exchange. You're going to exchange friction for risk and friction for dollars.
Right.
So looking at this, I'm just thinking, is there a good way for an executive to be seen as supporting the business and not that is the dark side, the one that is holding them down? How does our listeners can take what we're sharing and say, in this way, if I change, if I apply something, I can then be seen as supportive for the business, or there's none of that?
Start the conversation around value. Right? If we're going to build a new application and we have to stage it, right? We're going to build our dev and our test environments and our staging environment. We're going to go through all the internal testing and whatever external testing we're going to do, and that's going to have a cost to it, and that cost is somewhat unknown. If I start there, I'm starting wrong, right? But if I start with what is the value to the business that this is going to provide, right? This has $200,000 in value. Then I can do the math and I can say, okay, cool. So we expect the run rate to be 10% of that. However, we expect the initial testing and design to be 300% of that. And therefore, your ROI is going to be 3 years, 6 months, and 19 days. Right? Back of napkin. We're just looking for a ROM. Right? Is this an ROI that you would be comfortable with or not?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And if it's not, that's okay. Like that's perfectly acceptable. We just did some back of napkin math. How much tighter of a pencil do I need to get? How much sharper does the pencil need to get before you are comfortable with it? So before we go anywhere whatsoever, we're talking about the value that this provides to the business. And the expectation is the business comes up with that number. IT does not. Don't ever do it. Don't do it even once. You can come up with cost. You can figure out the ROI, but do not come up with the value. The business needs to come up with the value. That's the skin that they must have in the game to be able to play the game.
Here's where I think that statement is complex. There is no such thing as the business. There are different departments with different leaders who have different perception of value. So the CFO, the CRO might think that reputational risk or financial risk is the definition of value, where the CRO might believe the definition of value is revenue growth. So if the IT team is implementing a piece of technology that is almost explicitly in terms of creating a reputational risk foundation, the CRO will find no value in that and therefore won't want to participate in this implementation, even though they have a share of that spend.
Yeah, but that's okay. Like that's totally reasonable, because still the value, right? The value to the CRO's business, if the CRO is asking for the application, has a fixed amount, and protecting that reputation has a fixed cost, right? And if the CRO says, okay, what's this anti-risk line item? The anti-risk line item is inserted by the CFO to every project that we do. This is the cost to protect the business. And he goes, I don't want that. Great. Here's the phone number of the CFO. I encourage you to reach out to them. You have to get a written exception to this policy for this product. And so when the CFO is willing to entertain that, and you guys get through that, then I'll talk to the CFO, explain to them what the cost of that will be. And then if the CFO decides, that's fine. But as far as I know, no one overrides the CFO in this case. And it's certainly not going to be me as the CIO.
Fair, but I'm saying that's where the chaos is derived. So in a simpler case, I could go to my monthly IT meeting that has all the stakeholders, and there are 12 items in front of me, all have different value associated with it, and I won't come out of that meeting with a priority setting that is helpful.
Well, yeah, you won't come out of there with. So
right.
That's the other thing that we do, right? We allow too many stakeholders in every meeting. Right. The reality is that's probably the wrong way to do that. If we were to think about it, it doesn't mean we're not stuck doing it that way, because everybody also seems to want to be in every meeting, right? They feel like decisions are going to be made if I'm not in the meeting. Yeah, but what does your decision have to do with the purpose of that meeting? Well, I mean, I have to be in the approval chain, right? But can't you do that via email? Right. Like, are you additive, or are you just going to say yes or no and have some questions that allow a yes or no? If you just have questions about yes or no, how about we get to the point where it needs to come to your desk? Like right now, we're at the ideation phase. You're not in the ideation space. We don't even know if it's a good idea. We don't know if it's a reasonable idea. We don't know if the person suggesting the thing has even done the homework necessary. Let's get the homework necessary done first, right? Like there's a lot of this stuff that I think can be absolutely streamlined, but the business has to agree that one, we need to waste less time, and two, if we waste less time, IT could be more efficient, which means we're spending less money on the thing we don't want to spend money on.
But at the very least, I have a bunch of heads of departments coming into that meeting with 10 priorities in their head.
Sure.
The scope of capability within IT is to only do 10 things. So if 60 are coming at them and they only have bandwidth for 10, then a lot of people, in fact, all 6 will be disappointed as they leave.
I mean, but that sounds ideal. I wouldn't want to disappoint.
Your goal is to disappoint. Is that what you're saying?
I mean, I wouldn't want to. If I have to disappoint one, I might as well disappoint all 6. At least it's fair. I look for chaos to be fair, Paul.
Do you do a survey? Have we appropriately disappointed you today?
I do. Anybody happy as they leave the room? Hell no. Perfect. We worked together for years. How is this a surprise?
Wait a second. You're too happy. What can I do?
No. I'm happy when you're unhappy. Right? I work in IT, sir. This is customer disservice.
So you mentioned.
I mean, the reality of it is very much that, right? The reality is the business. So yes, while the business is never one thing, right? They are your customer. So if you want to replace business with customer, that's fine. It doesn't matter. But the business is your customer. Whatever piece of the business you're interacting with, whatever the piece of the business is making a request, whether that's a person, a team, a department, an organizational unit, or the CEO representing the whole company at large, right? It's still the same thing. They have more to do than they have people to do, right? Every organizational unit does. I've never talked to any C-level, CRO, COO, CPO, right? And maybe the CDO. No, nobody, right? Nobody that can honestly say, no, I've got plenty of free time. I've got way more people than I need to solve my problems. I'm way under budget. This is all going swimmingly. I'm going to achieve my annual goals in March.
Right.
Right. So everyone has that problem, and they're all used to prioritizing. What's funny is when they're all so used to prioritizing, but when someone else says you can only get 2 of your things, they suddenly get hurt. Like you've attacked them with some new piece of information they've never heard of before. We have to prioritize. We have a limited amount of budget. What are you talking about? All of my things need to be done. No,
Right.
You don't get all your things done when they're your things. You control them completely. You're now asking for third-party help. Let's be reasonable. We serve the entirety of the organization. I mean, sure, there are definitely going to be hurt feelings in, one of those 6 people feels that you misclassified their thing. Right. But again, that should be a conversation amongst the whole 6. Guys, we have 10 things to do, right? The 5 of you need to work with me to compromise, to determine what the 10 things are that we will take from each of your 5 lists.
Is it up to the CIO to mediate that
Yes.
conversation, or are you expecting those 5 leaders to decide amongst themselves
No.
what's more important?
Well, no, the CIO still has to mediate, especially because you have a large piece of consideration to help them with that conversation, right? Because it is unreasonable to assume they will understand level of effort. And some piece of the conversation has to be level of effort. It has to be kind of ROM costing, right? Rough order magnitude costing. They have to understand the implications of prioritizing that. Because while you may have 10 slots, not all slots are evenly weighted, right? So what you don't want is, okay, cool. So we've picked our 10 things. Each of those things will take 1 day to complete. And therefore, will be done in 10 days. And 20 days of this month will be unspent. We don't want that. We also don't want, cool, you pick 10 things. Each of those are 18-month to 3-year projects.
Right.
And so at this pace will be done in 18 years.
Right.
Like that's a big piece of what the CIO has to do and say, okay, cool. So is there anything that we can obviously say is the organization's number 1 priority?
Right.
This outweighs everything everyone wants to do, and we can all kind of agree on it. No? Okay, how about can 3 out of 5 of us agree that there is one thing above? Right? Like how far apart are we?
Right.
Let's start quantifying the level of effort. And you can do it with stickies on a whiteboard. Right. You could create effectively your own magic quadrant, and all the way down at one end you have low impact, low cost. On the other end you have high impact, high cost, and then every sticky goes in one of those quadrants, and you kind of pick. Okay, cool. So if we have a grid of 10, here's kind of what we can do, and we can start eliminating some. Right. You can eliminate the ones all the way at this bottom and all the way at this top.
And I think the chaos of new is controllable as you're describing. I think the chaos of change creates that complex dimension. So if you have to change a perfectly working data center version of your knowledge bases to a cloud version of those knowledge bases, and that requires the end users to change their habits of accessing those knowledge bases, that it's affecting everybody in the organization. Everybody gets to participate in the pain, and everybody's participating in the effect of it. Nobody's happy.
Sure, but then the cost goes up, right? That's still a cost. Cost isn't just dollars, right? Cost is also people cost. Cost is organizational change cost, right? You can frame cost and argue the nuance of cost however you want, right? And that's a kind of an important consideration. I would also say you don't have to do it new every time. Like, put the whiteboard on wheels and wheel it in every month and go, right? Here's the ones we've completed. Here's the ones we're working on. Here's the ones we said last time. Here's what we have started, haven't started, almost have complete, right? Like you can still manage it much like a kind of a little bit complex Kanban board and go, okay, cool. Like this one's about to fall off. We don't have something in the pipeline that's roughly its size. Let's say its size, right? Its level of effort is a 5 out of 10. Right? We need to replace it with another 5 so we can keep things going. Or you can wait till the next 2 comes off and we'll replace a 5 and a 2 with a 7, whatever whatever kind of metric works for you. Do we have something that we're ready to do? Right. Here's how we ranked everything before. Do we still agree with these rankings? Right. Do we need to relitigate what's currently on the board? Do you have 10 new things to add to the board? Right. But I don't know how many organizations like have a process that you would say is both rigorous and agile.
But how about the chaos of business impact? So my exact example, I'm moving from a knowledge base in data center to knowledge base in cloud. That's not only a change to the users, but you have a pretty significant expectation that they're participating in the project to do things like testing.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, that still falls under organizational change control. Right. That's why I phrased it that specific way, right?
But now you've got to convince this team who's used to receiving IT to spend their time and energy not doing business work and doing IT work, arguably.
Sure. But I would also question, what is the value of this change? Is the value of that particular change really that high that it's worth that amount of effort? Right? In which case, you need to be able to articulate. And it could be, look, we don't have a choice. This product is end of life.
Right.
Right. Which tends to be kind of the big thing that says, hey, right, like we've been running this on-prem. It's one of our last on-prem applications. It absolutely must move because its cost has been going up every month as the data center gets emptier and emptier. Right. And our footprint can't shrink because we're in a contract. And so we either have to renew or, whatever it happens to be, right? So if we keep this running, this application that costs us $2,000 a year because it's basically been on life support since just after we got it in, will cost us $600,000 a month.
Right.
Right. Otherwise, I can't conceive of a reason that you would change that. Like, we like Confluence better. Okay, I'm not sure that's a reason to make that change. It's going to be a big change. It's going to be heavily impactful. I think we suffer through the user interface.
How about the surprise where, the October surprise is we all worked together implementing this change. We all tested it. We're all satisfied with it. But once it's production and I can't roll back, the surprise problems occur. And now you're actually impacted in the business in a negative way because of the change we mutually agreed to.
Sure. I mean, but that should be part of your project plan, right? Like part of your go live plan is, hey, we are about to throw 10,000 chaos agents at this thing. Right. So we need all hands on deck. Also, during testing, what we found that we had 30% more issues found by users than we expected. While we don't think it's going to be that high as we go into production, or else we wouldn't be in production, we do want to prepare for that, and so we're going to pause these three things we have going on, so we can have all hands. And this is how that's going to flip. Like, again, I think that's what a good PMO is for, right? I think a good program office is really designed to handle those sort of things.
But all good planning, you must have experienced it, right? All good planning aside, there's always the unknown unknowns, and something occurred in production that ill affects the business.
Sure, 100%.
And now IT has to deal with that.
I mean, we can use CrowdStrike as an example. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but it is a thing that happened.
Yeah.
Right. Not about assigning blame, but it's all hands on deck until this problem is solved. Right. A ransomware attack. It's all hands on deck until this problem is solved.
Right.
Right. Somebody cuts the fiber cable in front of the building. Whatever it happens to be, like there's a million different things that happen. The data center gets hit by a freaking tornado.
Right.
Right. Like that sort of thing happens. You communicate the risks, but you can't really plan for the unknowns that way. No one could have planned for CrowdStrike before CrowdStrike happened. Now you can, because you've seen it, and you can go, okay, cool. So like this risk cost us this much. This unknown risk cost us this much. In order to mitigate that risk, we have to take these steps. Those steps will cost us this much. Do we want to do that? Considering that's a relatively rare thing to happen, right?
For that example, do you think it's more likely that it was a unknown, or that it was a known risk that people said, I'm comfortable with that risk?
No, I think it was an unknown. Genuinely, like I don't think anyone assumed that the perfect storm of CrowdStrike disabling your ability to stage definitions, and they had a process failure, and that process failure happened to hit on something that was so major it blue screened all of Windows. right? And that would come at a time and place where you're also going to encrypt you're also going to make your recovery keys impossible to get to, and you know what I mean? Like,
Right.
there was a lot of
There's
stuff.
a lot of ands. Yeah.
There's a lot of ands, right? If it had happened where it was like, this happened and it affected, Windows, Hyper-V hosts running the core version of Windows from 2012 and 2016, right? Then I would say sure, like there's more we could do there, but it didn't. It happened in the biggest, boldest, most bombastic way it possibly could have. I don't think anybody could have planned for that. Right. But again, now that we've seen it, so now we can in fact plan for it. We can in fact mitigate it, and the mitigation is not onerous or impossible. It is just costly. Right. You're going to go from one tool to two at a bare minimum.
So
Right.
you've effectively gone through all the potential chaoses to which you believe have IT solutions for.
Oh hell no, hell no, not even close. There's going to be new chaos tomorrow. I can't, any more than someone could have predicted that the 10 years ago the U.S. went from a 5-star to a 4-star rating. The U.S. dollar, right? It never had happened or 3 to 2 or whatever it was, right? From the highest, most pristine down one. No one could have assumed that would happen, and what that did to the currency market, no one could have predicted 2 weeks before. Right. It's not just IT that has these unplanned things that happen. The entire world is made up of these unplanned things. Right? No one could have assumed Katrina would be as bad as it was. No one could have assumed 9/11 would have happened. No one, outside of people who should have known better, could have assumed the housing crash would have happened.
Right.
Right? And yet every business in the U.S. and many businesses globally suffered the ill effects of each one of those. Right? Forget about IT for a minute. This chaos happens in the world. We are, living organisms are very much chaos systems, especially when you add the freedom of thought to those organisms. We are chaos systems, and we keep adding and adding and adding more chaos to the system. We're not adding order to the system. Anyone that thinks that we are adding order to the system has not been paying attention.
I'm pretty sure I could find some Reddit thread that would suggest that they were able to predict all of those things you just said.
I mean, there's 400 of them on 4chan. There's 400 people on 4chan that firmly believe Nostradamus predicted each and every one of them, and it was obvious.
That's correct.
Right? Like for sure, but still not common knowledge, right? So show me one person on Reddit who's like, no, my business survived this because I knew this was coming. I predicted each one, and we moved away before each one, and we're affected 0%. Cool, buddy, but you were still affected by the inflation. You were still affected by the transportation changes. You were still affected by, no matter how good you are, there's still some piece of that affected you, right? If you weren't running CrowdStrike and happened to be at the airport, you were affected. If you weren't running CrowdStrike and the POS system for the place you were at was down, you were still affected. There were internet services that were down that likely affected you to some percentage, even if they didn't have a direct major impact, they still affected you. Right? We're still the tail on all of these things is so interconnected that it still has a tendency to affect us. So we can't stay away.
Were the Amish affected? That's the real question.
Well, I don't honestly know.
So you'll be amazed because sometimes they go and use some services and they interact with others. So they may have been affected some way, somehow.
Yeah, I mean they still shop, right? They still interact with the world, even if they don't participate in it the same way. And many of them still have cell phones. They just can't use the cell phones on property, right? They can't use cell phones in the town. I mean, I'm all for every anniversary of the CrowdStrike incident. We just call it International Amish Day, right? It's International Be Amish Day. In memoriam.
Everybody walks away from their electronics.
So I think that after this, the C on CIO may be now known as a chaos operator or something like that, because what I get from it is that there will always be chaos, and you need to be ready to interact. And how do you solve that chaos that may come your way? Did I get that right?
Yeah, but I think it's important to communicate that chaos will come. There is nothing we can do to stop it. All we can do is mitigate it, right? So let's get ahead of the chaos we know is going to happen. And there's a lot we know is going to happen. Let's stop worrying about the chaos we don't know about until we've solved for the chaos that we really should know about.
Well, we learn a lot. We communicate a lot. We want to ask you, if you need any help, if you need to connect in some way, drop us a line, drop us a message. We're here to connect with you. And if you need our help, just drop us a line. We'll see you on our next episode.